The gravel crunched under my tires as I turned into the sweeping circular driveway of my parents' estate. The winter sun glinted off chrome and polished paint Bentleys, Ferraris, and a vintage Rolls lined the curve like trophies. My beat-up Toyota Corolla looked like it had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. I steered it deliberately between Grant's cherry red Ferrari and Vivian's pearl white Bentley, cutting the engine without a hint of shame. From the front steps, Grant spotted me instantly, his voice carried across the drive, loud enough for the cluster of relatives around him. Well, look who finally made it, still dragging that rust bucket around. Celeste. A few chuckles followed, polite and sharp all at once. I stepped out, smoothing the hem of my simple navy dress. Elaine, my mother, descended the last few steps with the grace of a practiced hostess. Her smile was warm enough for the guests, but her words were chosen for me. You know, dear, there are so many stable positions open at Harrow Technologies. A steady paycheck might help you upgrade. I met her eyes briefly, letting the comment slide past without reaction. If I'd learned anything over the last 5 years, it was that silence often landed harder than a retort. Inside, the scent of evergreen and expensive catering wrapped around me. The living room was crowded with people dressed in tailored suits and designer gowns. Glasses of champagne balanced between fingers heavy with gold and diamonds. I navigated through the small talk and backhanded compliments, offering nods and brief smiles as I went. Grant made a point of joining me near the fireplace, voice pitched for nearby ears. Viv and I were just talking. You must be proud of that little app you've been tinkering with. Still pays for gas. Right. Vivian swirled the champagne in her glass, adding, Bradley's dealership could get you into something more appropriate for a Harrow. If you could manage the payments? They laughed, as if they'd rehearsed it. I only glanced at my watch, noting the minute hand's slow climb toward the hour. The timing was almost perfect. I found a quiet spot near the window, where I could see the expanse of manicured lawn beyond. I wasn't here to win their approval. I was here to end the game they didn't know they were playing. Grant never missed a chance to perform when there was an audience. He leaned back in a leather armchair, grinning like he'd just set the trap. So, Celeste, how's the little app company still got a dozen users and a dream Vivian perched on the armrest beside him, her diamond bracelet catching the firelight? Oh, be nice. Grant, I'm sure she's doing fine. Though you could always come back to Harrow Technologies. Dad could find you something safe, something with benefits. The way she said benefits made it sound like a charity. Before I could respond, my father appeared with a tumbler of scotch, his expression that careful mix of pride and pity he reserved just for me, Celeste. The offer still stands. Operations manager in the tech division. No shame in admitting you need help. It's family. After all, family. I'd heard that word used as both an invitation and a weapon. My mind flashed back to past gatherings, the Christmas where they toasted Grant's promotion while ignoring my startup's first patent, the summer barbecue when Vivian joked I was our resident starving artist, the New Year's Eve when Dad advised me to be realistic before it's too late. The conversation now was no different, just more polished for the guests milling around us. They didn't see the undercurrent, the subtle way my place in this family had been cemented as the outsider who refused to play by their rules. My phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced down, the screen lighting up with a secure notification package secured. All systems go. I slipped it back into my clutch, my expression unchanged. Grant was still smirking. Vivian was still swirling her champagne. Dad was still waiting for me to fold. I only nodded politely, as though their words had been nothing more than harmless banter. In reality, the clock had just started ticking. 5 years ago, Quantum Apex existed only as a name scribbled on the back of a receipt. I had no office, no team. Just a concept and a stubborn belief that quantum computing wasn't a dead end. I maxed out every credit line I had, moved into a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint, and learned to stretch groceries for weeks. Every cent I earned went back into research and development, while my family vacationed in the south of France. I was in windowless labs, soldering prototypes alongside engineers who believed in the vision as much as I did, when they hosted charity galas. I was across the country meeting quietly with investors who preferred to remain anonymous. Each patent I filed went through a maze of holding companies to keep my name out of the press. The Harrows never noticed. They were too busy measuring success in square footage and horsepower at family dinners. My updates were brushed aside before dessert. They thought my quiet was defeat. In truth, it was strategy. Harrison Knox entered the picture 3 years ago, a venture capitalist with the rare ability to see past the immediate bottom line. He didn't care about my lack of a luxury car. He cared that the algorithms we were developing could change entire industries. His funding pushed Quantum Apex from promising startup to industry disruptor. We'd been moving in silence ever since. Prototypes became products. Products became breakthroughs. Breakthroughs became bargaining chips, one of which I'd just used to purchase Harrow Technologies. I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes until the hour. My phone stayed warm in my hand, the earlier message still lingering in my mind. Perfect timing. I let my gaze drift to the windows, where the manicured lawn stretched toward the horizon. Soon, everyone in this room would stop talking long enough to listen. Grant had been circling me all evening like a shark that smelled blood, waiting for the moment he thought I'd finally crack. It came when a group of our father's colleagues gathered near the buffet, drinks in hand, trading polite questions about business. Grant leaned in, loud enough for half the room to hear. Loser. Can't even afford a decent car. He grinned, basking in the ripple of laughter from the few who thought it was just harmless sibling teasing. Once upon a time. I might have fired back, or at least let my irritation show. Instead, I smiled slow, measured and reached into my clutch for my phone. My fingers moved with the ease of muscle memory as I scrolled to the secure number and pressed call. A voice answered on the first ring. Ready when you are. Bring it in, I said, then ended the call without another word. Grant's grin faltered just a little, like he wasn't sure if I was ignoring him or plotting something. Vivian tilted her head, studying me as though she was trying to read my thoughts. Our mother, catching the faint tension, floated over to change the subject, but I barely heard her. It started faint, almost like the hum of a distant lawnmower. Then it grew steady, rhythmic, unmistakable. The conversations in the room faltered as people glanced toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. A couple of guests stepped outside onto the terrace, shielding their eyes as they looked toward the sky. The sound deepened, the thump of rotor blades cutting through the winter air. Napkins fluttered on plates, and champagne glasses trembled in their stems. Grant moved closer to the windows, frowning. What the hell is that I stayed where I was? My hand loosely wrapped around my glass. The noise was loud enough now that even the most distracted guest had stopped talking. Heads turned, feet shuffled toward the glass, curiosity pulling them forward. The first shadow passed over the lawn, sleek and dark against the pale grass. I set my glass down on the nearest table and stepped forward, closing the distance to the windows in slow, deliberate strides. The dark silhouette came into full view, slicing through the sky with clean, decisive lines. The helicopter's body gleamed under the pale winter sun, its rotor wash sending ripples through the manicured hedges and making the snow-dusted grass sway. On its tail, crisp against the black finish, was a silver emblem Quantum Apex. The murmurs began as a ripple, then swelled into a low wave of speculation. Guests pressed closer to the terrace doors, their breath fogging the glass. Some shaded their eyes, others raised their phones, all craning for a better look. I moved toward the windows with unhurried steps, the hum of curiosity filling the silence that had replaced the earlier laughter. When I stopped, I turned slightly toward the crowd, my voice carrying just enough to reach the edges of the room. My ride's here. Elaine's fingers tightened on her champagne flute as her eyes flicked between me and the helicopter. The stem slipped from her grasp, the glass tumbling to the marble floor and shattering into a spray of gold liquid and crystal shards. She didn't bend to pick it up. She just stared. Grant's brow furrowed, his usual smirk gone. "Quantum Apex," he said under his breath. Like the words didn't quite make sense. Vivian glanced between us, her lips parting, but no sound coming out. Outside, the helicopter descended with controlled precision, the downwash whipping the edges of guests' coats and sending paper napkins tumbling across the terrace. Harrison Knox stepped out from the cabin as soon as the skids touched the ground, ducking instinctively under the spinning blades. His charcoal overcoat flared at the edges, his eyes scanning until they landed on me. Gasps and whispers followed him. Though most of the room didn't yet understand why his presence mattered, Harrison was not the type to attend social gatherings without a calculated reason. I held his gaze for a moment, then turned back to my family. Richard had moved closer now, his scotch forgotten on a side table. "Celeste," he said slowly. "What is this?" I let the question hang in the air, savoring the weight of it. The rotors began to slow, the thump, thump, thump easing into a steady hum. Harrison started toward the terrace doors, a thin folder tucked under his arm. I stepped away from the window, ready to meet him halfway. The room, the house, the entire evening had shifted. They didn't know it yet, but nothing here would be the same again. Harrison reached me at the terrace doors, pulling them open with a firm hand. Cold air rushed in, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel. All eyes were on us now. I stepped forward, my voice steady and clear. "Since everyone seems curious, let me save you the trouble of guessing. I bought Harrow Technologies. The deal closed an hour ago for $7.2 billion. The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. Grant let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You're joking." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "I'm not." His smile faltered. "You don't have that kind of money." Richard's face had gone pale, the scotch-colored flush drained from his cheeks. "This isn't possible," he muttered, almost to himself. Vivian gave a short, airy laugh, the kind she used when she wanted to make something disappear through dismissal. "Celeste, if this is some kind of stunt, it's not a stunt," Harrison interrupted, stepping inside. "The acquisition is official. The board approved it this afternoon." Gasps rippled through the guests. Several turned their heads toward Richard, as if expecting him to deny it outright. He didn't. Grant took a step closer to me. You think you can just buy the company. Our company, I don't think." I said. "I did." Vivian shook her head, but the movement lacked conviction. "Why would the board even consider because?" Harrison said. "Quantum Apex offered a fair market price, with the resources and vision to take the company forward. Harrow Technologies has been stagnating for years." Richard finally found his voice. Though it was rough around the edges, "You went behind our backs." I tilted my head. "I made a business move. The same way you taught us to, except I didn't underestimate my competition." The air in the room had changed entirely. Guests whispered in corners, some openly watching as if this were theater. I glanced once more at my father, then at my siblings. "You've spent years making sure I knew where I stood in this family. Now, you'll know where you stand in mine." I let the moment breathe just long enough for the weight of it to settle before I spoke again. "Do you remember?" I began. "When you told me quantum computing was a dead end. Grant, you said it was a waste of time and money. A fantasy project for people who didn't understand real business." Grant's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. I turned to my father. "And you when I asked to lead the tech division. You told me I lacked experience, that I should learn to follow before I tried to lead. You gave the role to someone who had never written a single line of code in his life." Richard's eyes narrowed, the muscle in his cheek twitching. "Finally." I faced Vivian. 3 times I was on the short list for promotion. 3 times you convinced the board to pass me over. You told them I was better suited to creative brainstorming than actual leadership. Vivian opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I let my gaze sweep over all 3 of them. The patents you all ignored, the ones you dismissed as impractical, they're now valued in the billions. Every single one belongs to Quantum Apex. The same technology you rejected is what made this acquisition possible. Harrison stepped forward, placing a folder on the coffee table. Inside were copies of the patent filings, market valuations, and licensing agreements. The pages fanned out like a deck of cards, each one a receipt for the years they'd spent undermining me. You built walls to keep me out, I said, my voice steady. I built something bigger than your walls could ever contain. Richard looked down at the documents, his hand tightening into a fist. Grant shifted his weight from one foot to the other, avoiding my eyes. Vivian's fingers tightened around her glass until I thought it might shatter. And then, in the corner of my vision, I saw a flicker of movement reporters stepping onto the terrace. The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and shouted questions. The terrace had been transformed into a press pit, cameras and microphones angled toward the podium Harrison had arranged at the far end. Behind me, a massive screen flickered to life, projecting Quantum Apex's latest innovations, chips the size of a fingernail capable of processing more data than entire server farms, encryption algorithms that could be solved only in centuries, not seconds. I spoke over the hum of clicking shutters, while Harrow Technologies focused on outdated infrastructure. Quantum Apex invested in the future. The result is here, in front of you. The slides shifted, replacing images of prototypes with charts. Harrow Technologies' market share, once dominant, had been bleeding for years, thick red lines trending downward. The contrast was brutal against the green trajectory of Quantum Apex's growth. From the crowd, Grant's voice cut in. You stole it. All of it. Those are our designs. I didn't even glance at him. Every breakthrough you see here is original Quantum Apex property, patented and filed long before Harrow Technologies could recognize its value. Another slide appeared patent numbers, filing dates, inventor names. My name. A murmur rippled through the press. One reporter leaned forward. So the rumors were true? Quantum Apex's CEO was operating anonymously. Yes, I said, and now you know why. If I'd revealed myself too soon, I would have faced the same sabotage that plagued every one of my proposals inside Harrow Technologies. The air seemed to thicken with the story writing itself underdog turned industry leader. Underestimated daughter buys her family's company. Flashbulbs popped like fireworks. I caught a glimpse of Richard in the back, his expression carved in stone, and Vivian watching me with a look that was no longer amusement, but calculation. I closed with one line, each word deliberate. This acquisition isn't just about business. It's about vision, and mine proved stronger. The reporters surged forward, shouting for follow-ups as I stepped down from the podium. Harrison was waiting in the wings, his eyes telling me the next move was mine. When the noise from the press finally subsided, I stepped back to the microphone, effective immediately. Harrow Technologies will operate under a new name, Quantum Harrow. A new board of directors has already been appointed, each one an expert in quantum computing, AI, or digital infrastructure. This is the leadership the company should have had years ago. The murmurs began again, sharper this time. I didn't let them build. For those wondering about the current executive team, Richard, Grant, Vivian, you're welcome to remain with the company. In entry-level positions, you'll have the chance to learn the technology you once dismissed, from the ground up. Grant's face flushed crimson. You can't be serious. I am, I said evenly. Real innovation isn't inherited, it's earned. Vivian crossed her arms, her voice dripping with disdain. You expect us to take orders from junior staff if you want to stay, I replied. Elaine stepped forward from the side of the room, her voice low but urgent. "Celeste, they're your family. There's no need to humiliate them." "This isn't about humiliation," I said, my gaze never leaving hers. "It's about accountability." Richard said nothing, but I saw his jaw tighten, the muscle flexing like he was holding back words he'd regret. I closed the folder in front of me and handed it to Harrison. "Decide quickly. The new training cycle starts Monday." The room was silent again, the kind of silence that follows an earthquake, everything still standing, but nothing quite the same. I stepped down from the stage, the sound of my heels on the marble floor marking the beginning of a very different order. From my penthouse office, I could see them standing in the lobby: Richard, Elaine, Grant, and Vivian, each wearing a bright yellow visitor badge clipped to their expensive coats. They looked out of place against the glass and steel lines of Quantum Apex headquarters, like relics in a modern museum. I waited until the receptionist called up to say they'd arrived, then took the elevator down. The doors slid open to the sound of their voices, low, tense, uncertain. "Welcome to Quantum Apex," I said, crossing the marble floor toward them. "Or, as of this week, Quantum Harrow. Your first day starts now." Grant bristled. Vivian kept her eyes fixed on a decorative sculpture by the elevators. Richard's expression was unreadable. I handed each of them a slim folder. 6 months of intensive training under our junior managers, people who actually know the systems you'll be working with. You'll rotate through departments, starting with technical support, adapt, or step aside. There's no in-between. Grant opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "Not here. Save it for your team lead. They're expecting you." The silence between us stretched as they turned toward the orientation desk. I stayed where I was, watching the people who had once dictated the terms of my life follow someone else's lead. When they reached the door, I called out, "Grant, move your Ferrari from the executive lot. My helicopter needs the spot." He froze for a beat before walking on, shoulders stiff, the badge swinging from his lapel. I turned and headed back toward the elevators, already thinking about the meeting waiting upstairs.